Awesome, great. So let's start with this session today, guys. And we really appreciate your time from all over the world places. So really appreciated the time from like Abhi, Joe, Mike, Neal, Tanuj, and Manisha. And today, this session, we're gonna talk very specifically about uh, is the CX and EX like very buzzword. Everybody is aware of these words name. Is should be handled by a single person or there should be a dedicated person owning these roles, like basically managing the for uh, expectations for the managing in their organization. So let's start with, I think like we'll start with Joe first to share her experience and talk about like what does she feel about it. She said that it depends with her comments, but let's see that what she has seen in her experience, and then we'll take it from there on. Yeah,
Well,
Joe.
actually, I think, NK, I was one of the people that voted no in your poll,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because I think my reason for saying that is also sort of very much linked to the way I view customer experience as well, which is this obsession with a single person owning. I think actually is a little bit unhelpful, because ultimately both the customer experience and the employee experience are the construct of the involvement of so many different departments with different responsibilities. So for me, actually, the key word is not about ownership, it's more about orchestration. And I think that to get and deliver a great employee experience, you need somebody that's got the responsibility for that orchestration across the multitude of functions really that will be involved in creating a great employee experience. And that's going to involve obviously HR, and there is a big sort of HR element to it, and that actually might be the place where that orchestration responsibility resides. But it's also facilities, and it's about the IT, the tools for the job, and actually it's also about what's the organizational purpose and brand values, and how do you reflect that into the employee experience. Just as it is important to, with customer experience, to orchestrate all of the activities across different customer touch points, to create something that again reflects the company's ethos, the purpose, and the brand values. So I kind of think, whilst you might be tempted to try and put all of that into one responsibility and one role, because definitely there needs to be alignment, I think, between the two things. In essence, really the employee experience should really reflect what the company is trying to deliver externally to customers as well. But ultimately that tends to come together only with one person and that's the CEO. And I think if you try and create this uber role that is a combination of those two responsibilities, what's happening internally and externally, you're just creating a really massive role that actually is then very challenging for one single person to fulfill. So for me, it's about orchestration and then creating really excellent collaboration across the organization. And I think it's more important to focus on the governance and actually how you're going to performance manage bringing that great collaboration to life in the organization. It's far more important to focus on that than to focus on the organizational design. And I think too often actually we get hung up with organizational design and hierarchy and where things should sit, when really what we should be focusing on is how to create that collaboration.
Yeah, awesome. I think I'm somewhat very related with no, but looking at the comments received is like it tends me to think about, like, is it really one person job, that is CEO for this organization to maintain this? But when it goes down to the narrowing down to the focus about CX and EX, it has to be a different person. So I think I would say, maybe Neal, what would be your thoughts on this? Like, maybe what's your perspective about this?
I think I share a lot of Joe's sentiments. I mean, I think I also voted no in the poll. It's funny. It also depends how you read the question. I think is the question that a single person should own both CX and EX? Is that a single person should own either? I would still vote no in all accounts. I think the challenge is, or maybe not the challenge. I think what makes it attractive to have a single person is to say, well, this needs an owner. We need to have ownership over this or it's not going to happen. But in doing so, you end up actually having the opposite effect, which is making everybody else not accountable. Neal's the guy. Neal owns CX and EX. I don't have to worry about that, which is just ridiculous. Everybody in the organization has to worry about EX and CX, and everyone's responsible for it. Sometimes people will say to me when I do work with clients on EX, for example, people will say, talk about leadership accountability. And truthfully, it's employee accountability too. Everyone's accountable for the culture that you create and for the employee experience that you have. So I love what Joe said about orchestration. I often use the term governance. I talk about capacity. What's the organization's capacity for CX and EX? How does it weave into conversations? How does it weave into process? How does it weave into budgets and approvals? And how is it measured? How is it influenced? What's the skin in the game? I had a conversation with a client yesterday who said, yeah, everybody in the company is bonused on CX, but most of them don't really know what that is or what because it's a complicated index score and they don't know what it is or how it gets calculated. And I said, well, what's the weighting of that bonus element? Is it, if I'm an individual contributor, am I 95% bonused on my own stuff and there's that 5% weighting? And if within my own stuff, maybe there's components there that roll up to that weighting. Do I understand the connections between those two things? Do I understand how I influence CX and EX? Do I understand what my role, what my part is? And I think the other thing I love that Joe said was about organizational purpose, which needs to infiltrate to brand, both external brand and internal brand. Why are we doing this beyond making a profit? Some of the best organizations, but don't get me wrong, we all want to make profits, but how you get there can deliver on greater goods. And some of the best organizations have really beautiful aspirational purposes. Dove is one that comes to mind, who I can't remember the exact wording of it, but it's about, helping people feel comfortable, women feel comfortable in their own skin and not having anxiety about, and not having social pressures about those looks. It's not about selling a bar of soap or a skin cream. Obviously that's how they facilitate that. But when you have that kind of purpose, that kind of meaning that you when you hire, you find people who have bought into that meaning. That changes how they interact with customers if they're directly interfacing. A customer service agent who knows that their job is to make someone feel comfortable in their skin is going to handle a customer service interaction very differently than one who wants to sell a bar of soap. But if you dig deeper and you go, like, what are the downstream impacts of good and bad customer experience on websites, on forms, on policies? How does the person on the legal team understand that purpose and how their role fits into it? How does the person on the risk team understand? How are policies created with that concept of creating this environment where women feel comfortable in their own skin? How does that permeate through everyone's role? Do they get the connection? And of course, EX is the way you deliver CX. So it's tough to separate these two. I mean, you can have different owners, of course, in terms of parts of those journeys, employee and customer, but there has to come to some overarching plan and strategy. Disney is a great example of a company that, they design the employee experience for the CX outcome. Everything is mindfully and thoughtfully planned to how they hire and train. They embed the brand that they want their customers to feel in their employee experience. The employees feel that same brand from day one, and everything they do is in service to their CX. If you don't design the EX that way, you're never going to get that amazing CX outcome. So if you separate these two things in silos, how do you deliver on this incredible CX outcome? So yes, for me, it's not a single owner. It's part of organizational culture. It starts with organizational purpose. It weaves into our day-to-day performance reviews and how we connect our job to the bigger purpose. It's something we're all have skin in the game on and we're bonused on. It's organizational. And the CEO has to believe, by the way, because if that's the other thing, when you assign it to a chief experience officer and the CEO's not bought in, you're dead in the water.
Yeah, I think like
just as with customer experience, if the CEO isn't demonstrating those behaviors, it undermines everything, doesn't it?
Seen it too many times.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Neal, you give a very like exclusive perspective. I think like the example of Dove, I think stuck to my head. So I think it's more of the person who is have a feel about it, if whether it is EX or CX. And you said that the EX that brings the CX, because like EX is where CX is actually starts from EX. If it is not happening in EX, then I think CX is nowhere is gonna, like we cannot have, so basically we cannot have a CX without having an EX, right? So I think like that's very beautiful, beautifully said. And I think the questions and the concerns that I have seen people who said yes is about most of the people said that the CX and EX should be owned by a single person who is like a kind of a CXO. But my question would be here to like get more clarity here when we talk about the ownership. What do you think is kind of is this directionally being directed by a single person, or there should be a specific leader who should take deep dive into and who are like in the skins of CX and EX? What would you say, Neal, about it?
I really don't believe in a specific leader. Again, I've seen it happen too many times where, again, the goal was, hey, we need someone to own this, but the result was lots of people then don't own it. I think it comes down to, governance. It comes down to, building a great CX framework and EX framework. Doing a project right now with somebody where we're building a CX framework. The entire C-suite is building that framework. They all have to have buy-in and skin in the game for their departments to operationalize that CX framework. Within that CX framework is an EX, is an employee journey process. So everybody on the C-suite is involved in building that design. The next level would be after the framework is done, at the VP or SVP level will start to operationalize that. The framework can't be super prescriptive. That's why you think about aspirational purposes, but even like high level goals and that you're trying to obtain in the CX framework. The next level down has to say, well, how does that work in legal, in risk, in customer facing teams, in IT? How do we make that come to life? And then you operationalize it. And then you include it in performance appraisals and bonuses because everyone owns it. So it's just this, it's a snafu, right? We want someone to own it, but then only one person owns it. Or if no one owns it, then does anyone own it? But I think if you build it culturally in by having frameworks, by having governance, by building it into appraisals, by building it into culture, by building it into job specs, building it into language. When you have a monthly meeting with your team talking about performance, are you talking about, well, we hit the shareholder goal, we're a little bit low on revenue, or do you talk about, our goal was to make women feel comfortable in their own skin. Here are some metrics that tell us how we're doing against that goal. Here's how risk contributed to that goal today. Here's how, so it becomes part of language. I just don't think a single person should own that. I think I think companies need to be obsessed with it, and I think it has to be embedded into culture.
Awesome. Awesome.
I have a question, NK, for Neal, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Neal, like you said, that the one person should not own it, right? So it's the C-suite that owns it. So do you even need a CX person there? So for example, like you are talking to a company, the project that you're talking about, right? They don't need a CX people. You are there consulting them, and all the C-suite is involved, right? And the product is involved, the engineers are involved, the director of engineering, right? The marketing, the sales, the operation head, everyone is involved, right? The support head. So why do you even need a CX people in that sense? Because there will be nothing to own for the CX person. Everything will be owned by these other departments.
I think you answered your own question. I don't necessarily think you need a CX person. You do need to have a CX framework.
Right.
Look, CX, I've seen this. I mean, I would love to hear from Mike too on this. I know I feel like he's waiting to say something about it. I would just say this last thing. I feel like I've witnessed, I'm sure we've all witnessed companies that have someone with a title that has CX in it.
Right.
And if you talk to 20 people who have CX in their title and ask them what their job is, you'll get 20 different descriptions. That is a problem, right? I own CX. What does that mean? I own CX. That means this. No, I own CX. It means this. Okay. This is a problem. And again, it pushes all the accountability to these people who don't understand the full scope of CX and how it really touches all aspects of the organization. You need to train the entire organization on what your CX framework is and how they contribute to it. And I want to pass the torch over to Mike because I feel like I'm
I think
talking too much.
I think this the question was like CX person. So I will have another thought for it. But let's hear from Mike before, and let's see here. Mike, please, your thoughts on this.
First, I'll say, Neal, you're not talking too much. Don't you fret, sir. Now, I'm going to caveat my statement because I'm going to stir the pot here because I do think it does need to be owned by a singular person. Okay. Now, owned, I do agree when I conceive of someone owning a particular piece of an organization, they're the person who's directing all of the things that's happening. They're the person who's in charge of the direction of the organization, of the orchestration, to Joe and Neal's points. I agree with you on that. I am 100% there with you. However, I don't think that these two things need to be 100% separate, between having one person own it and have everyone own it. Now, I say that because I believe it's been borne out, and this is only from my experience here in the United States, so take this as you will. I think the idea of everyone owning it has been done, and we've seen that it hasn't worked. I think that's borne out just by the proof that CX is becoming bigger and bigger and more important to companies as time has gone by. There's a reason why we've had the CX boom. And I think that's the very reason, because there is no person that owns it. And I think it's because everyone is too busy getting lost in the sauce with everything else that's happening in the organization that they can't focus and don't know how to focus well enough on CX. I think we need someone in CX to come into an organization and create all of the things, Neal, that you were talking about. However, I don't think it stops there. I think the person needs to come into the organization to keep that happening, because I think you'll have that framework. That's great. I think having everything embedded into the culture is aspirational. However, at this point, I think it really, really needs, there's going to need to be time, copious amounts of time and effort being put into that to achieve the results, like you're saying, of Disney or Dove, to actually start bearing that fruit and be to the point where you can step back and say, this company is going to continue in this way for X number of years.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what you're. I don't disagree with some of those thoughts. I would disagree that it's borne out that it doesn't work when everybody owns it. I could cite, and I'm sure we could all scour our thoughts here.
I'm not making this blanket coverage statement like it never does. That's what I'm saying. I apologize.
Yeah, no, I know. And I think the reason CX is so big right now is maybe less to do with ownership and more to do with the understanding of its value. I think that for the longest time, people like us have been preaching its value and on deaf ears. And as the world becomes more global, as what's that book from? I think it was 97, something about market leaders. And it was the 3 strategies you compete on, right? It was operational excellence, competing on cost, It was customer intimacy, competing on tailoring and having a nuanced experience and customized experience for your customers. And it was competing on product, having a prestige product with a broader experience at a higher price point. I think that I think the operational excellence one has now become a very hard place to live, because it's becoming easier and easier for companies to live there, even when they live in the other two buckets. You know, so even companies that have a prestige product can operationally cut cut their cost down, increase their margins substantially, and then they add value services or added components to make that product worth more money. But the operational excellence is there. So what happens is I think you're now competing on the two more than the three. And so people are now saying, well, I'm not going to be the Ritz-Carlton, or I'm not going to be the Tesla, or I'm not going to be whatever that prestige product is. So I have to compete on customer intimacy. So I would just say, nothing you said I disagree with. And I'm not saying that you can't have an owner who has the title. I'm saying the problem is you still have to have it embedded in the organization. And oftentimes it doesn't get done that way. But I will say the reason CX is emerging has less to do with who owned it in the past and more to do with people understanding that it's the last battleground of competition, other than being a prestige product. And even a prestige product, of course, you have to have an incredible CX experience, but they already knew that. They were already doing it.
I think that cultural point is really important, because to my mind, actually, every organization is different. The politics are different, you know, the personalities are different. So there is no one size fits all, you know, organizationally for what is going to work in different places, I think. But it is about how do you establish the culture and governance to get it embedded, you know, from top to bottom and right across the organization. And you know, I think too often actually that is the part that gets neglected. People are so busy sort of working out what tools to deploy, or, you know, how to sort out the foundations in terms of data and technology, and the cultural piece actually gets forgotten. So.
And I would just add one thing to that is that leader that Mike, you talk about. I agree with you. If that leader is good, you know, and I mean that to be frank.
Yeah, it's okay.
You know, that leader, if you're going to have that leader, are they the kind of person that? So my experience is there's very few people that are amazing at all aspects of this. Is that leader the kind of person who is a true leader, who understands that and recognizes that? Do they bring people into the fold? Are they truly collaborative? Do they create ownership and buy-in amongst those folks? I think having the wrong person there can really be obviously destructive.
Oh, yeah.
Having the right person there can be fantastic. In both cases, you still need CX framework and overarching belief and governance and CEO buy-in. Abhi, you've been so quiet. What do you think?
Yeah, I was just going there, Abhi. So what's your take on this, Abhi?
Yeah, so I think I agree with a lot of aspects being said already, but I think I'll side with Mike. I do tend to believe that, you know, there needs to be ownership defined with one person at the end of the day. And I say that because, you know, I've seen this play out in front of me from both sides, because when I started my career, I was in the CX and EX consulting, working with various B2B product and services organizations. And then I moved over to one of these organizations, and, you know, I saw it from the other side of the table. So when we look at EX, it is typically, you know, managed by, owned by, let's say, by the HR department. When you look at CX, then it varies. It depends on, you know, what the organization structure is and, you know, who sees it in what way. I've seen it being handled by marketing in some organizations. I've seen it being handled by quality organizations. I've seen it being handled by strategy organizations. What invariably tends to happen in my experience is, you know, once you get the feedback from different stakeholders, you act upon it in isolation. right? You look at what the feedback is and you try to find a remedy for it in isolation. And it so at the end of the year, you will probably go back and report what you have implemented, what it has resulted into, and there could be significant gains here and there in terms of numbers, etc. But when you step back, and I've seen enough of this from both the CX and EX side, and I feel like some of you have already said, it needs to converge at some point. And the remedy probably is probably one. It's not two different remedies for two different problems. The remedy is probably one, and it probably is, what does my market want? What are my customers looking for, right? And so how do I align my business strategy with it? And if I am to execute upon it, then how do I gear my organization to deliver upon it, right? And if you connect all these dots, then you'll see the feedback that you're getting from customers getting addressed, the feedback that you're getting from your associates getting addressed, and it all leads to your business goals. And maybe what I'm saying sounds a bit ideal because it doesn't play out too well often in that manner, but I feel that's how it should. And hence I feel that who should be taking responsibility and ownership of it? Somebody right at the top. But at the same time, I agree with what Neal said. Is it just his responsibility? No, it can't be. It has to be the entire organization. Would he or she be the person administratively responsible for it? No, it can't be. All departments have to work hand in hand to make this happen. But at the end of the day, who do we turn towards? Who do we hold accountable? Right? So there has to be somebody fixed for that, right? It can't be, we can't hold the entire organization accountable. While the expectation obviously is that the organization take it in the right principles and work towards it, but somebody has to show the path and hold forth. So that's how I think.
I think that's interesting though, because I do think that that point of view of single accountability is often what destroys collaboration in organizations. And personally, I think that performance management systems really need to be sort of dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century to figure out how you do create collaboration and celebrate that and encourage it across an organization. Because I think it's almost impossible to create a great customer experience without it. And yet so often in large corporate entities with lots of different functions, all of the KPIs and performance management systems effectively are, maintaining the silos. So yeah, I actually think, the really crucial thing for all of this to succeed is just a fundamental rethink of those performance management systems.
Joe, I couldn't agree with you more. And I would go so far as to say that most performance management systems, and why I think they get dragged kicking and screaming, is because we've kind of, I don't know if this is happening all over the world, but I feel it certainly is in North America. We've kind of become so averse to having discussion on performance versus dictation on performance, and we're so averse to having scrutiny and varying opinions and negotiation. Like a leader doesn't want to negotiate with their employee. They want to say, you had to fill out 8 widgets and you filled out 7 bad, you filled out 9 good. They don't want to, I've seen so many companies struggle to embed corporate values into the performance management system. And the reason is because they shy away from the discussion. But the reality is the magic happens in the discussion, and the buy-in happens in the discussion. The accountability actually happens in the discussion. If you coach well, if you allow your employee to self-discover, if they have a clear picture of what your goals are, if they have a clear picture of this larger CX and EX strategy, if it starts with purpose, if it's break down into practices and process and tools, if it lives in behaviors and meetings, they should have a very clear picture, and be able to self-assess and be able to be honest. And I just think people shy away from the gray. They would rather live in the black and white. And the problem with the black and white is it's very hard to innovate and grow or disrupt in that space. What I loved was, and maybe it was Ritz-Carlton, I'm trying to remember if it was Ritz-Carlton or Four Seasons, but I think it was for sure one of those two brands, is they, a lot of people try to prescribe a customer interaction. It should be like this. They walk into retail, they call the call center. It should go like this. You should have this kind of a greeting. You should say this. You should use their name 3 times, blah, blah, blah. Versus saying, we want the customer to feel this. How do you think we can get there? Here are some possible tools to get there. So I think it's one of these two organizations that uses storytelling rather than black and white auditing. So rather than say, I'm going to audit the experience and it has to fit uniformly to this prescribed approach, I want you to understand the outcome. I trust you because I hired you and I gave you good tools. I trust your ability to get there. And when you do something I never imagined possible and I would never have put into the prescribed program, I want to hear about it. And I want to share that story so that other people can up their game and hear what you did. And they do this daily. I think it's Ritz-Carlton. They do daily storytelling of incredible customer experiences that their employees basically innovate based on purpose and values and brand. So I don't think you can screw this up by having a leader or not a leader. But I think you can screw it up by having the wrong leader and having a lack of agreed upon rules and governance. And I will say, Abhi, I agree with what you said. Historically, CX has been owned by marketing, by operations, by IT. I've seen it owned by a lot of different groups. And what I mentioned earlier is it's rare that one of those groups has the breadth of experience to understand all the nuances and interactions of CX or EX. And unfortunately, my experience has been, in most cases, their bias is to their own expertise. So if marketing owns CX, they build all kinds of great things into marketing material, but retail and website and contact centers don't quite have the same priority or skin in the game or place at the table. If operations owns it, marketing doesn't have that same place at the table. If IT owns, so the problem is there aren't very many people on this planet that there are a few. I know there's some folks, I forgot his name, from Starbucks, certainly, who had, there's some great examples of people that have done an incredible job. But, and that's why I said, Mike, to your point, like, if they're a great leader who understands their blind spots and understands their role isn't to decide on CX, it's to corral CX.
Yeah, that's what I think.
To get the difference,
point
then
again.
wonderful, have an owner.
and that's my thing, because I do feel that that's the function of the person at who we'll call the top of CX, or the owner, and we'll put that in quotes because it's like sort of an owner, but not really, depending on how you define it, right? Now, Neal, I want to say though, to your point, I feel like that sword cuts both ways though. Because if you have a poor leader, of course, that's detrimental. I think, though, that if you have no leader and you have this tug of war in the organization to which way CX is going to happen for anything, it could be likewise detrimental, if not worse, because then you're just going to get to a point of stagnation. So
I agree. But I've also seen leaders own it and the tug of war still exists.
Oh, totally. I agree with you.
Which comes back to the CEO every time, right?
Yeah.
Make a decision.
I see this.
Shit or get off the pot.
I see this very interesting. I think what I feel here is that if the culture is right, if the culture is built up in a way that we have a right framework, and the organization is collaborative enough and focusing on their core values and the goal vision. And then probably it doesn't matter whether we have a one leader who owns it or a multiple leader who owns it, but the rather is they are like going towards a common goal, and the culturally they are bound towards, right? CX is very complicated. I'm just listening to this conversation, and it's so complicated to operationalize. So guys, maybe I just wanted to take some examples. So in a real example, real world in organization, if you can share some of your ideas or some of the things that you have looked upon, is how it has been operationalized into a growth stage companies, like where is it been worked well, and what are the things that we should what we would be guiding any growth stage companies who are like doing the CX and EX deploying in their organization. So maybe we can start with Neal and then move on to maybe Abhi to talk about as well.
I'll try to be brief.
Yeah, so
Sorry, go ahead.
I'll go back to what I was saying earlier, and when you look at CX, and I'll take the example of my organization. For several years, I've seen the top two elements that come out are do what you have been contracted to do well. Second, bring in value where you can. Tell us what you can do better. How can you make us a better organization? When I look at EX, typically, and I don't know if it's different elsewhere, but in the Indian context, the top two feedback that comes out is give me a career and give me better pay, right? So typically it's that. Now, when organizations start acting upon it, right? So if I take the CX element, okay, so customers are asking us to deliver on what we have been contracted to deliver upon. So let's go back and analyze when did we didn't deliver, what went wrong, and how can I, do a course correction. Who should I bring in? Should I bring in a better program manager, etc. The second feedback, bring in value. Okay, let's call the customer for a workshop. Let's bring some, thought leaders, SMEs. Let's find out what we can do well, and it follows that track. Similarly, when you look at EX, the first feedback on give me a career. Okay, let's build a career development or a career progression plan, etc. Give me better pay. Let's find an excuse to not address that, or find ways to push it under the carpet till the time we can. And again, that follows its own course. But if you look at it in conjunction, and that's where I say you need to step back a bit, and you look at it in conjunction and say, so what essentially are my customers telling me? My customers are telling me that, hey, you need to organize yourselves in a way where you understand what my priorities are, you deliver upon it well, and there are opportunities which the customer is actually hinting, where you can bring in your expertise and get to. So if now I build my business strategy around it, right, saying that, hey, let me figure out what can I take to the customer, what propositions can I build, what should my offerings be layered with, which brings more value to the customer. Let me first figure that out. Secondly, if I'm to execute on that, again, it has to be my employees. So, are my employees rightly skilled? Am I showing them that path that can bring them or give them that purpose, where eventually they are made to realize that they are creating value for the customer, they're not just doing a job. So when I link that two together, I build a compelling proposition to my customer, which ideally should lead to better margins, which ideally should put me in a position to pay my employees better, and obviously for me to make that happen, I have upskilled or shown my employees a path to work upon. So hence, from what I have seen, I would tie it together, and I would take a step back and build the business strategy around it. And like I was saying earlier, now if I'm to execute all this, it's different pieces of the organization coming together, making it happen, right? So obviously when you've built a strategy, when you've sort of built the path for it, then you bring all the relevant stakeholders into it, and orchestrate this entire exercise and make it happen.
I have a question for you on this. So you voted yes, right? That it should be owned by a single person.
Right.
Now let's think about it this way. Now there are employees, right? In the whole discussion, mostly we have been talking about that the customer experience is the thing that we should focus on, and we should tell the employees to focus on that as well, or make them feel that way, right? It should be a purpose, like Neal said and Joe said. Now the question is, if it is all about customer centricity, what about employee centricity? Like you mentioned, employee needs more pays, right? Employee need a better career as well. And there are two different kind of employees, be it India, be it anywhere. Someone is looking for money and someone is looking for a better career, better learning, right? So how a single person can focus on both the things? The person who's focusing on the customer needs to focus on his whole dedication towards what customer is asking, right? And the person, because I voted no, and I feel that the person who focuses on the employees should focus on these things, that how we can make them grow, right?
But
So
I'll come back
can it be
to
on?
yeah, but I'll come back to my belief. I don't believe these things will work in isolation. One will lead to the other, and hence administratively I agree, we can have different people administratively owning the CX and EX. I have no problems with that, but I'm talking from a strategic direction perspective. How do I link these two together so that one leads to the other? That has to be taken up by a person or a group of persons, but someone at the top who has that visibility, who can who has that perspective, right? It can't be left with one function, because typically a single function
I think you
lacks
have to
that.
add in brand and marketing to that as well. So that's why I just think kind of don't get hung up on the the kind of, should it be one or two people or how many roles? I think it is about how you get it, how you get that alignment strategically at a very senior level. So ultimately it will come together with the CEO, and then it's about how do you create the alignment for the orchestration of a great employee experience, a great customer experience that reflects the brand values, and that might be 2, 3, maybe even more roles, but at that senior level. But it's about the collaboration and then creating that orchestration right the way across the organization.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Joe there, and I would add that a lot of organizations I've seen do this really well. Have multiple project teams, cross-functional project teams who execute against these things, and they rotate through people as well. I just want to say one thing that kind of like stood out to me, Abhi, as you were talking, and Tanuj, as you were talking. I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong.
That's okay.
If it makes you feel any better, no one's ever spelt my name correctly in my entire life, neither my first or last. What I will say is, I think there's also this really interesting discussion that could probably be a whole other meeting for another day. And that is the difference between EX and employee engagement. Because I think what I heard people talking about there was more, I would call employee engagement. And it's tough to confuse those two. And it's easier to understand the ownership of those two, I think, as well. But it's tough to confuse those two, because I don't want a bunch of happy people in my company that don't serve my purpose. And it's very easy to accomplish that. And it's happened, I mean, I can create the best benefits package. I can create the best, career progression. And I can have a bunch of, I'm not even a sports guy, but a football reference comes to mind. I can have a bunch of linebackers really happy when all I need was a quarterback, So I think it's an interesting place that people do sometimes use those two things synonymously, and they're not the same. And when you look at the entire employee experience, it's more than engagement. It is designed for the CX. It is designed for the outcomes the business is trying to accomplish. I don't want you just to be happy. I want you to derive happiness from accomplishing our goals. And actually, a comment that was made is, how do you get them to buy in? I would actually suggest to you, you don't. You hire people bought in. Like, it's very hard. If I don't believe in your aspirational vision for the company, I will never be forced to change my view. I mean, you could persuade me if I'm on the fence, but great organizations have such a clear purpose stated. It's embedded in their job specs. It's embedded in their interview questions and their screening. It's built into their onboarding. So you're bringing people on board who are bought in, and then you're designing an employee experience, which includes employee journeys. This is why I say it's not just about engagement. It includes employee journeys that specifically derive good, like, all of those positive employee engagement indicators are hit simultaneously with the positive CX indicators. I know that I derive fulfillment from my job. I know what good looks like in terms of CX and business outcomes. It's been told very clear to me. I understand how I'm being measured. I understand what I'm trying to accomplish. Versus, I mean, I like your comment, Abhi, especially in a growth organization, what value do you add? But to what end? So if your company is the operational excellence company, if you're competing on price, then the value you would want that person to add is how to become more efficient. But if your company is the prestige product organization, the value you want them to add is to create an immersive customer experience. Those people are totally different, and you have to hire them before, not after. You understand what your value proposition is to your customers. So I just feel like, I mean, I know I'm like a broken record here, but I feel like these two things cannot be separated. You cannot deliver. I've seen lots of organizations deliver a very consistent, mediocre, or okay customer experience without really tackling the EX side. But if you want to deliver at the highest level, then you have to consider your employee design, your employee journey, and treat them as your customer. And then you will be able to deliver on the best CX experience.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think it leads to another layer of question. I know that these kind of conversation go on. So you said about, like, I was thinking about the employee journey, and same time people talk about customer journey, right? And say that these two are like, not a separate journey. Like some say that these are not two separate journey, right? Employee journey, and if you have to deliver a great customer experience, then you should start with an employee experience. So these are two related. But when I've looked at the different type of tools, technologies available in the market, and even like when people talk about the customer experience journey specifically, and designing employee experience journey, these exercises are being done separately. Like, I haven't seen like somebody talking about and exactly doing employee journey and customer journey together. In my experience, but like, just want to understand from your perspective. Maybe
actually we did do some research that looked at both, and it was literally looking at understanding customer pain points and then aligning that with employee pain points. And it's amazing actually how much the two heat maps really crossed over. So I think it's a similar approach and framework, and absolutely there needs to be alignment, I think, in the two approaches, but not necessarily with one person responsible for making that happen.
Mm-hmm.
I would echo what Joe said.
So Joe, would you say that, sorry Neal, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So my question to Joe was, like, if you talk about a framework in an organization, so if I'm designing a CX framework for delivering a great customer experience, understanding my customer's pain point, understanding their journey touch points, so would that how that framework should incorporate our employee journey, like employee experience framework as well?
Well, I think it's a similar approach, which is gathering, so if you understand, what's the proposition that you're seeking to deliver from a customer experience perspective, and you're describing that, with some values, those same values need to be applied to, and how are you enabling and empowering the employees to deliver on that? So, for instance, if it's about, sharing what you know when it helps. I mean, that was one of, when I was at British Airways, that was one of the kind of service values that we stated. But it's as much about ensuring then that employees have got the information that they need to be able to deliver, that level of service to a customer. So I think you can go through the same sort of mapping process, really, that understands, what's the employee journey at that stage, what are their pain points, and what tools and skills do they need to enable them to fulfill what you're asking them to deliver to the customer.
Awesome. I think like it's a great insight, and I think it would be great to maybe I'll sync with you, Joe, better to understand these two combined journeys doing together, because I have been like facing challenges. I have done like customer journey experience separately and employee journey separately, but combining those two together hasn't been that easy. Means like I've been finding it very difficult to do that. And which element it should like connect each other, so we see, and that drives the value. And specifically, like when you have different departments and they own their different KPIs. So basically, to drive value, we have given KPIs to that specific. Marketing is supposed to generate the marketing qualified leads, and sales needs to generate more sales qualified leads. CSM has to make sure that the implementation is done correctly, and they continue the business. So everybody is like just focusing on their KPIs. So that drives somewhere the revenue, but that doesn't drive the wow experience.
Absolutely, but I think we're departing into a whole new discussion with that.
Oh yeah.
In order to have great customer experience, you've got to develop the right kinds of KPIs. And again, you're highlighting just one of the many challenges that exists that sort of perpetrates that ongoing, silo mentality that so often we see as being the big hindrance to great customers.
Yeah, agree. And I think if I tie this to my previous question, I think, as a single visionary of this entire organization, when we work with CEO to design the KPIs for everyone, and it has to be aligned with our global goal of the company as well. So that ties up like having single vision. But I think from me personally, operationally, we have to have people who are focused specifically into their domain, who knows that well to lead that. So that's what we do.
But equally, I think you need to develop the sorts of KPIs that will get those different departments, working together towards a common customer goal. And and I think where organizations struggle to define what that is, that's where then you get the kind of conflict really between different functions.
Yeah. I think like that I'm taking this conversation to a different level, but I think we'll discuss that separately on a different note, Joe. I think just want to appreciate everybody's time. We are almost on the time. So just wanted to conclude this discussion. And again, maybe Tanuj, if you can help me to get a quick poll into this group. Let's see what it is right now.
Just give me one moment, NK. Just give me a minute. NK, I'm actually not able to do that poll.
Okay, that's fine. I think we can just take thumbs up and thumbs down.
That's okay.
Yeah.
What's the question?
Guys, I think
same question. Same question.
Same question.
Trying to see if any of us were persuaded.
Where technology just messes everything. Like we're a call of 7 people. We don't need to run a poll on Zoom.
Yeah.
That's a great example where people are like, I need to have the best technology to have a great customer experience. No.
You just talk it out.
You need better people. That's it. You need people. You need good people to do that.
Plans.
Yeah.
People and plans, right?
Yeah.
What was the same question?
Same question.
So one person for both EX and CX. Is that hands up. Who agrees?
So yes or no, that's it, the same way. Yes, no, others, because now I have shifted to others. I was previously no. So I need another conversation with you guys to conclude that. Now it's shifted to others now.
I haven't shifted. I'm still saying it doesn't need to be the same person.
Okay.
Great. And from my point of view, with all this great conversation, I feel like it doesn't has to be same person. It is actually, for me, CX is not a person. Just to answer like one of the question that Tanuj just shared, CX is not a person. CX is a practice, and it's a culture that needs to be inculcated in the organization. So we are not dependent upon any person for this.
Yeah.
So Mike, what's your?
I would say my answer is the same as it was before, but I don't interpret the question quite the same way. I don't interpret it as, are these two things connected? Because they are. I interpret it as, should one person versus an organization have accountability? I will just say one other thing on that, human experience, which is both. It really is human experience. And so
absolutely,
this idea of CX informing EX or EX informing CX, I mean, HX informs it all. And that's just, at the end of the day, all of our needs on our base level, I think Maslow's hierarchy is still fairly accurate, are the same. So if you design things with that in mind for employees and customers, you're usually in a good place.
Awesome. Mike?
Fair. I'm still where I was at the beginning. I still think you need a captain to steer the ship when it comes to HX.
Awesome. Great. Abhi?
Yeah, so I would also be where I was, but I think I would just say that, yeah, I mean, it's probably slightly larger, and I mean, it depends is probably the best answer. But I think my takeaway from this conversation, I completely agree with Neal in what he said, that EX drives CX. So I think we need to see how those converge. Does it need to be a single person manning it? No, definitely not necessary. But it, like I said, it depends. There are organizations, probably it helps to have a single person running the show. There are some organizations which are probably culturally more evolved, where it might not require the same thing. But I think both these need to converge is, I think, what I completely agree on.
The one thing
awesome. Yeah, I think.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Whilst I think it doesn't necessarily need to be sort of joined together and the responsibility in one role, there is one person who I think is crucial, and that is the CEO. How they behave, and that will make or break it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, I have to. I know we're running out of time, Joe. I just have to underscore what you said, because I think sometimes we think about, I'm heading up IT, and what does that mean? I'm heading up marketing, and what does that mean? I'm heading up risk, I'm heading up legal, I'm heading up operations, logistics. These are very specific functions as part of a larger picture, but CX and EX is the larger picture. That is why the CEO has to be bought in 100%. Even if he or she assigns an incredible CXO, the CEO still needs to be 100% behind that person.
Absolutely,
yeah, totally. Absolutely. I think though that having a CX leader in the organization, let's just switch it to HX. We'll call it HX, so that way it's all encompassing, because I kind of really love that. Can only help augment everything that's going on. That way the CEO can focus on more of everything else that happens, and the HXO can instead just make sure that the human experience is part of the decision making.
Yeah. That's a great
All right.
point.
So I think humanizing the experience is the great takeaway, and I think that's a great deal of it. And I think just to interest of time for everyone, I think I just want to make sure that I thank you so much, Joe, Neal, Mike, and Abhi, for taking time out today. Again, it was really great conversation, and I'm sure that we got to HX today, and we'll take this takeaway and we'll share to our audience and the group of people, to everybody who voted to my previous poll. And I think we are still very clear on this, that there is no CX and EX separately. There is an HX involved in it, and it's not a person dependent. It's actually if you have right culture in place, and if you have right framework with right governance, and if your leader is right, like it is actually based out of your driving from your CEO point of view. So then I think you have got it.